Hey MERCYhouse, you've made it to Thursday night of Holy Week. I really hope these video devotionals have been helpful for you to walk you through some of the most significant events in all of human history. My name is Tommy and I'm on staff with MERCYhouse, and tonight I'm going to be reading from Luke 22 verses 47 to 71, and I want to encourage you to have your Bibles open and read along with me as we study this passage together. So let me read starting in verse 47. While he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And one of them struck the servant on the most high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and officers of the temple and elders who had come out against him, "Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness." Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They had also blindfolded him and kept saying to him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" And they said many other things against him, blaspheming him. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council and said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." So they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his very own lips." So as we're reading this, the path to the cross just gets darker and darker. And here we see Jesus endure what is the loneliest night of his life. The flow of this narrative is pretty straightforward. It begins with Jesus praying on the Mount of Olives, knowing full well what's about to happen to him. With his knowledge of how close the hour of his execution is, Jesus' levels of stress are just so intense that he's literally sweating blood from his head. And as Melanie mentioned earlier today, Jesus' turmoil and troubled spirit is so intense that God the Father actually sends an angel, a supernatural means to comfort and minister to his son. And that's a serious level of stress and pressure for any human to be under. And all the teaching is done for now for Jesus. The leading, the guiding, the shepherding, it's kind of on pause for this moment as Jesus really does face his destiny. The wild thing here, MERCYhouse, as you're reading this, is that even though the moment of his death on the cross is ticking closer and closer each second, he still has this marathon of hurt and of pain and abuse and torture that he has to get through in order to get to death on the cross. He first has to endure what I mentioned before is going to be the loneliest night of his life, and the way that it begins is with betrayal. In verse 47, while he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" This is one of Jesus' best friends, his brother, a person who had so much time with Jesus pouring his life into him, probably countless late night talks, talking about personal struggles, long days serving alongside one another, teaching, guiding, pastoring Judas. Jesus loved Judas. We need to remember that Jesus loved Judas to the full extent of his human and godly ability to love another human being. And Judas, for a sack of coins, delivers Jesus up to be murdered. And second, he experiences distancing, and not social distancing as we know it today, but something far worse, a denial of friendship. Verse 54, when they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." One of the most powerful gestures of support and love is solidarity. When you can stand with someone and say, "I'm in this with you, through thick, through thin, no matter what, I will not leave your side." That's one of the sweet beauties of a marriage covenant. It's a binding of souls into this permanent state of solidarity, where I say to Caitlin, my wife, "I won't leave you. I'm here with you. Whatever you go through, no matter how sick you become or how crazy life around us gets, I am with you. I will stand by your side." And Peter's denial of even knowing Jesus is about 100 steps in the opposite direction of this solidarity. I think we can lose the significance of the emotional pain that this would have caused Jesus. I think we understand betrayal, right? We can wrap our heads around that, but we can gloss over Peter's denial because we tend to kind of relate to it. Like, we've been there, Peter. We definitely have not stepped up and spoken on behalf of Jesus when we had an opportunity to. And so I think we can lose the significance and weight of the hurt that Jesus would have experienced from Peter. Imagine my wife, Caitlin, being dragged out of my house, being demonized and persecuted for offenses that she's completely innocent of. And then imagine me kind of hiding in the corner as this is happening. And when someone says, "Hey, haven't I seen you with her before?" And my response would be, No, you haven't seen me with her. And someone else would later say, "I'm pretty sure that you're at least friends." No, we're not. We're not friends. And then finally someone says, "Hey, isn't that your wife? Isn't that the person that you're married to?" And my response would be, "No, I don't even know her." I'm not sure what the word for the extreme opposite of solidarity is, but this is what it looks like. The denial of friendship, it cuts super deep because that relationship is super deep. And in this moment, Jesus could really use a friend, if nothing else. Someone to be there with him, someone to stand there with him, but Peter denies him of that. So betrayal, denial of friendship, and really that's just the beginning. Verse 63, now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept saying to him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" And they said many other things against him, blaspheming him. Jesus experiences being mocked and being ridiculed. Actually making fun of his divinity by hitting him and goading him and saying, if you're such a great prophet, why don't you use your prophetic powers to figure out who's actually hitting you, as they're blindfolding him and hitting him over and over again. And so he's beaten, he's spat on, he's ridiculed. And then lastly, verse 66, when day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council and said, If you are the Christ, tell us. But he said to them, if I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. For from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God. So they all said, are you the Son of God then? And he said to them, you say that I am. They said to him, what further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips. So morning comes, but not with a bright light or a Band-Aid to help Jesus get over being betrayed, being denied friendship, being beaten and mocked. It comes with just outright rejection of who he is. And one of the most climatic moments in Luke's narrative has the people asking Jesus, are you the Son of God? I mean, that's what this entire book is about. It's where all of the events are pointing toward. And Jesus' response to this question ought to be his moment of great triumph, as everyone realizes that he is the God of the universe, that he is the creator and upholder of everything. And he's here to save and rescue us from sin. What have we done, Jesus? Jesus, stand up. We're so sorry. We were so wrong. Can you forgive us? You are the true King, the Son of God, and we're going to bow down and we're going to worship you. But that's not what happens in this moment. That's not what Jesus' response brings forth. Jesus confirms that he is, in fact, the Son of God. And what's their response? It's further hardening of their hearts with complete and final rejection of Jesus Christ as God. Verse 71 says, "Then they said, 'What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips.' And with that, they drag him to be crucified." So a couple thoughts for you to chew on as I wrap this up. One, I know that there are times when you feel lonely and isolated, especially right now, where we can feel that we are just thrown into a pit of seclusion, where we're sitting in our pain with no support, no love, no help, where no one else can actually relate to what we're experiencing. And the truth that we need to focus in on when we're in that place is that God is a God who can relate to the deepest depression that we experience, the most intense anxieties that we bear, and the most quiet and lonely isolations that we experience. He's not only a God who relates to us, but a God who actually loves us and cares for us. We got to remember that. Two, I think it's easy to read about Judas and Peter and set their examples here as things of what to avoid. The reality is that we've all been Judas. We've all been Peter. We've all been the guards who have mocked and who have ridiculed Jesus, whether openly, just with our words, or just through the pursuit of sin, the way that we're living out our lives. And unless you have received Christ as your Savior and God, we've rejected him, just like the religious leaders have at the end of this passage. And so one thing that I think that we really need to wrap our minds around during Holy Week, and as we read this text, is that moments like this are all about Jesus. They're all about Jesus. I think we're really prone to want to insert ourselves into the story, to want to stand on stage with him in solidarity and to take those hits with him. But what Luke is pointing out here is that no one did that when the opportunity arose. There was a time for people to be there with him, to be there for him, people who were in the perfect positions to do so based on their intimate relationship and fellowship with Jesus, but they didn't. Jesus is alone in this because no one else could do what he's doing. If there is someone in this passage to follow the example of, it's Peter. And not in the denial part, but specifically in verse 62 where it says, "And he went out and wept bitterly." Now I know Peter's story of redemption on the other side of the cross is awesome. We know that God uses him, probably the most unlikely person to be a rock of a leader for the early church. And we also know that Jesus does get to have his moment of triumph, where sin is defeated, death loses its sting, and Jesus is worshipped as God, as he should be. But we're on this side of the cross, in this part of the narrative. And our response at this moment is to weep and to worship. We are the betrayers, we are the deniers, we are the abusers and the ridiculers, but praise be to God that Jesus, having endured the loneliest night of his life, did so out of his love for those who broke his heart. Thanks for joining us tonight, and I hope you have a great night. Love you, Mercy House.